For the next step in our cabinet box construction, I need to put a groove in the bottom of these sideboards. And this groove will be on both sideboards, and it'll allow these side pieces to basically receive the bottom board of the cabinet. So this is different than what we did with the first cabinet where we used pocket screws. And this one we're putting grooves into this cabinet. So to make this cut, what I have here is I'm actually going to be doing this with a router. So I've got my router here, and I've got let me show you what I have in here. And I'll show a close-up of this in a little bit, but there is a 3/4 of an inch router, there's 3/4 of an inch diameter router bit in here. It's a circular router bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it across this straight edge, and it will cut out a 3/4 inch wide path right where I need it. Now I've set the height of this bit using my, this is like a height gauge or thickness gauge, and I just kind of set it right there, and this groove is going to be 3/8 of an inch in depth. That's half the thickness of these 3/4 inch boards. All right, so the groove will be half the thickness. So it'll go into about half the meat of these sideboards. Now, to make this cut accurately, what I've done is I've clamped this straight edge across both boards. So I have both my sideboard pieces laid open like a book, it's like a butterfly wings. They're laid out, and what I'm looking at here are the insides of the cabinet. And I've got basically a piece of wood here clamped to the edge of the table, and I've got both sideboards butted against this piece here. And this allows me to make sure that both sideboards are even when I go to make my cut. I've also got the sideboards clamped directly to the table. So when I start making this pass, these sideboards won't move or wobble on me. So that they're together, they're set against a flat piece, and they're clamped to the table. I've also got this straight edge clamped to the table. The straight edge is set to the distance, which is equal to where my edge of my router bit is to the end of the circular side. Now my router, this is a plunge router, has a flat side and the rest of it's round. So you could be tempted to sort of run the flat edge against your straight edge, and you could do that and that'd be fine. The issue is if you at all get any wobble, it'll actually walk away from this flat edge, and you'll get a miss. But if you run the round side, as long as you have any part of this round side's contacting this straight edge, we'll get a nice straight even cut. So what I'm going to do is I have it set again from the distance from the router bit to this round edge. So as long as I'm making contact with the round edge on that straight edge, I'm good to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this cut in 2 passes. So when I plunge down, I'm going to actually just go down around 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to eyeball that, and I'm going to make 1 pass across the whole length. And then I will make a second pass at the full depth. So I'll push it all the way down to the 3/8 and make my second pass. The reason I make that first pass is it does a better job of cutting the wood fibers and the plywood and prevents tear out. So I'll actually get a cleaner looking groove by doing it in 2 passes. If you did it all in 1 pass, the depth would be fine, but you get a lot of hair and frillies and all that sort of stuff. We want to avoid that. We want this to be a cleaner cut. So we're all set up. Again, so the other thing I wanted to mention was this plywood, although we talk about it being 3/4 of an inch, it's actually 23/32 of an inch, where the hardwood, the actual cherry or poplar, whatever we've been working with, is actually a true 3/4 of an inch thick. So there's a 1/32 of an inch difference. Is that a big difference? Not really, but it is a big enough difference that you should probably, if you're going to be doing this type of joint, purchase you can actually get a router bit with a diameter equal to 3/4 or 23/32 of an inch. So if you're planning on doing a lot of cabinet building and box building, I would recommend you pick up a router bit that has a diameter of 23/32 and not one of 3/4 of an inch. So if you were going to be putting a piece of hardwood into this groove, we'd want it to be a true 3/4 of an inch. But since we're putting a piece of plywood into this groove, we want a 23/32 router bit. If you use a 3/4 inch router bit and you put in a 3/4 of an inch piece of hardwood, there will be a little bit of slop in there. It's not a tremendous amount, but I mean, that's the best practice, is to use the 23/32 for your plywood groove. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and make my first couple passes. I'm going to reposition the camera so you can kind of see this coming across. I've already cleared a path, so I know when I push this through, I'm not actually going to be bumping any of these clamps or any of that business. So once we get this done, this groove in here, the only other groove we'll need to make will be for our backboard, and then we can start putting this cabinet box together. So this is the most important cut. You could also do this cut on a table saw. It's a lot easier to do in a table saw, since you can just raise your dado blade up to that 3/8 of an inch depth. You can set it up, the dado stack, so it's 3/4 of an inch wide, and run your boards through it. And you get a repeatability there that's nice. Well, try to get repeatability with a router. I think the easiest thing to do is that's why we're clamping these two pieces together. You could cut one, remove it, reset the straight edge, and cut the other, but then you run the chance of them being slightly off, and then when you put them together, maybe they're a little skewed. So by doing it this way, by clamping them together, we're making sure that this groove is the same level across both pieces. But again, a table saw would do that just as easily, and you can do it in two separate cuts. The only issue is most entry-level woodworkers don't have table saws that can accommodate a 3/4 inch wide dado. Mine only goes up to about 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch. So that's why we're going to be doing it on here. And this is more beneficial since routers are only a couple $100. Table saws can be way more expensive to get one that accommodates that full thickness dado. But my old table saw, my old kitchen, I had a much bigger table saw, and doing a 3/4 inch dado stack was a piece of cake. And consequently, it was a lot faster to make this cut. This took a good 10 or 15 minutes to clamp all this down, get the straight edge set, make sure I have my depth of my router bit set right, and so on. So it's easier on the table saw. But this is probably the most common way to do it for entry-level woodworkers, since routers are easy to come by, and full stack dado blades on a table saw are not. So let's go ahead and switch to camera view, and we'll go ahead and make our pass. Okay, so I have my speed setting to about 5 out of 6, since this is a small diameter blade. I'm going to turn it on. Got a piece of plywood here. Put it in there. It's nice and easy. So you can probably tell just by doing that this bit is probably a 3/4 of an inch bit, since it's got a little bit of wobble in it. So for this next cut, what we're going to be doing is putting a 1/4 inch groove down the entire length of these sideboards. And that 1/4 inch groove will be where the 1/4 inch back piece of plywood sits. So it'll actually engage this piece. So we'll put this groove on both sides of the bottom cabinets and both sides of the top. Now it's important to remember that it has to be on the back. So when we run these through, you may have to rotate them to engage the back. So we'll make those cuts. Also on the top pieces, since they're symmetrical, it's important that, actually it doesn't really matter what side they go on unless you had a preferred orientation up or down. But for these, it's the bases, it's very easy since we have the toe kicks. We know it has to be over here. So to make these cuts, I have my table saw set up. So my table saw can, as we've done this before, can take 1/4 inch grooves. So we'll use this since it's a lot easier for me just to push these pieces through than it is to do this in the router. But you can do this on a router if you'd prefer. But setup, this is a lot more production line friendly, since once we set the table saw up once, we can turn it on and we can run all our pieces through and make all our back cuts. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to run all 4 boards through, and then we'll be ready to start putting these cabinets together. I got my safety glasses, my hearing protection. I'm going to try to stand out of the way here for this. Alright, so that was really good. We have our groove where we're going to put our bottom board. We have a 1/4 inch wide, 3/8 inch deep groove for our backboard. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these, and we can start putting it together.